All right, let's get right into one of the longest, most intense standoffs in modern history. For over 60 years, the United States and Cuba, a tiny island just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, have been locked in a really bitter conflict. And believe it or not, things are heating up again, right now. To put it bluntly, the situation on the island is dire. A massive energy crisis has literally plunged the entire nation into darkness. You've got hospitals struggling, schools are shut down, and basic services have just ground to a halt. And the reason? It's almost unbelievable. They've simply run out of fuel.
So, in response to Cuba's desperate pleas, Russia has sent an oil tanker loaded with the fuel they desperately need. This ship is, quite literally, a lifeline for the island. It's the one thing that can turn the lights back on and stop a complete societal collapse.
And here's where it all gets incredibly tense. For decades, the U.S. has maintained a naval blockade around Cuba, using its warships to cut off supplies. So now you've got this Russian tanker on a potential collision course with American policy. And to really understand the stakes here, we have to rewind the clock 60 years to a time when a very similar situation almost ended the world.
Yeah, we're talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis, a terrifying 13-day period back in October 1962, when all of humanity basically just held its breath.
So, how did it all kick off? Well, an American spy plane flew over Cuba and spotted something that chilled them to the bone: Soviet nuclear missiles being set up. Missiles that could hit almost any city in the United States. President Kennedy's response? He set up that naval blockade, he called it a quarantine to sound a little less aggressive, to stop any more Soviet ships. But the tension just kept climbing. Until October 27th, a U.S. warship dropped a practice depth charge on a Soviet sub, sort of a "we see you" message. The problem was they had no idea that sub was armed with a nuclear torpedo. In the end, a secret back-channel deal cooled things down, but wow, it was a terrifyingly close call.
And this quote from the U.S. Secretary of State at the time really just says it all. This wasn't some theoretical political game. This was real. Two nuclear superpowers staring each other down, with the fate of the entire world hanging in the balance. It is the closest we have ever come to total annihilation.
But let's go back to that Soviet submarine, the B-59, for a second. Imagine you're on board, you're deep underwater, suddenly bam, you get hit by a depth charge, your communications are knocked out, you're completely cut off from Moscow, and your standing orders are crystal clear. If you're attacked and you lose contact, you assume World War III has started. But there was one critical safeguard. To launch their nuclear torpedo, 3 senior officers on board had to all agree, unanimously.
So, the sub's captain said, "It's time. We launch." The political officer agreed. That's 2 out of 3. But the third officer, a man named Vasily Arkhipov, refused. He said no. He argued that maybe the Americans didn't even know they were there, and the best move was to surface. This one man's incredible calm, under pressure we can't even imagine, single-handedly prevented a nuclear war. He literally saved the world.
So that's what happened. But it doesn't really answer why it happened. I mean, how did Cuba get to the point of aligning with the Soviet Union and pointing missiles at its giant neighbor? Well, the roots of that conflict go back decades.
It really starts with a broken promise. After helping Cuba get independence from Spain, the U.S. passed something called the Teller Amendment, promising they wouldn't try to control the island. But just a few years later, that was followed by the Platt Amendment, which gave the U.S. the right to intervene in Cuban affairs whenever it wanted. Oh, and it also established the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base, which the U.S. controls to this day. You can imagine how that created some serious mistrust. And that mistrust finally boiled over in 1959. A revolutionary named Fidel Castro overthrew the corrupt, U.S.-backed dictator Batista. And one of Castro's very first moves was to nationalize all the American businesses, seizing control of sugar plantations, factories, banks. To Washington, this was just an unacceptable act of defiance.
The U.S. response was swift, and it was secret. First, they tried the Bay of Pigs invasion, where CIA-trained Cuban exiles tried to invade. It failed spectacularly. Then came Operation Mongoose, which was just a campaign of widespread sabotage, bombing bridges, roads, anything to cripple the economy. And then there were the direct attempts on Castro's life. All of this, naturally, pushed Cuba right into the arms of the Soviet Union for protection.
What came next was a personal and political battle that would define the relationship between the U.S. and Cuba for the next half a century.
The CIA's efforts to get rid of Castro became the stuff of legend. There were reportedly over 650 attempts on his life, and some of these plots were just wild,
Exploding cigars, a poisoned wetsuit, they even tried to hire the mafia. And the craziest part, none of them worked.
Castro's ability to stay in power through all this was, well, remarkable. He held on for nearly 50 years. In that time, he saw 11 different U.S. presidents come and go, all of whom tried and failed to get rid of him.
So while the covert plots failed, the main weapon in the U.S. arsenal has always been the economic embargo. For more than 60 years, these crippling sanctions have been designed to basically strangle the Cuban economy, leading to chronic shortages of everything from fuel to medicine and food.
And that long, painful history of sanctions and standoffs brings us right back to the crisis that's unfolding today. The parallels are just striking, aren't they? In 1962, it was Soviet ships with nukes challenging a U.S. blockade. Today, it's a Russian ship with fuel challenging a U.S. blockade. The cargo is different, sure, but the core conflict, a foreign power trying to get past a U.S. cordon around Cuba, is exactly the same.
And for Cuba, the stakes are absolutely existential. No fuel means no electricity. No electricity means hospitals can't run, clean water can't be pumped, society itself just starts to break down. This isn't just some political standoff anymore. It's a deepening humanitarian crisis.
You know, for 6 straight decades, the unwavering goal of U.S. policy towards Cuba has been one thing: regime change. The embargo, the covert operations, the diplomatic isolation, it has all been aimed at forcing a change in government on that island.
Which leaves us with this final, urgent question. That Russian oil tanker is a direct challenge to that 60-year-old U.S. policy. So as these two forces head towards a confrontation at sea, we all have to ask ourselves, are we about to witness a very dangerous echo of the past?